Hello everyone, how are you all doing? Over the past few months, we have talked a lot about Russia's long-range drone campaign against oil infrastructure and how it's having a significant effect on the Russian war effort. Then, a couple of weeks ago, they added ships into the equation, adding more pressure to Russia's wartime economy and logistics. Now we're seeing the next stage, and I don't think it's one that anyone really expected. Since the 18th of July, Ukraine has conducted numerous strikes against distribution centres of the online retailer Wildberries. Zelensky is calling it part of Ukraine's long-range sanctions campaign. So today we're going to look at what Wildberries actually is, why Ukraine is targeting it, what they've done and the damage they've caused, and of course what it all means for the Russian economy and its war in Ukraine. Before we get into it, over 80% of you aren't subscribed, so if you enjoy my content, please hit the subscribe button down below, as it really helps the channel out. Now let's get into it. We're going to start off with what Wildberries actually is and why it matters this much. Wildberries is the biggest online retail shop in Russia, full stop. One analyst quoted by the Associated Press put it at 52% of all online orders in the entire country. That's not a competitor to Amazon, that is the Amazon of Russia. The company has an annual turnover exceeding 4 trillion rubles, which is approximately 30 to 35 billion US dollars. It operates more than 200 warehouses and employs 48,000 staff around the country. Additionally, between 50 to 800,000 third-party sellers, which include small merchants who list their products on the platform, operate through the website. Before the attacks, it was pushing around 20 million orders a day. And it matters politically because Wildberries is owned by Tatiana Kim, who is Russia's richest woman, worth somewhere around $8 billion. In 2024, her company merged with an advertising firm called Rus, in a deal that Vladimir Putin personally signed off on. So this isn't just some random shopping app, it's an asset wired right into the Kremlin, which is something that'll matter later in the video. So why hit a retailer at all? Ukraine has put out a few reasons, and it's worth separating out what's proven and what's being claimed. The first is dual-use goods. Dual use means stuff that is technically civilian, but useful in a war, and this part is well documented. Wildberries openly sells body armor, helmets, radios, drones, and drone accessories, such as release mechanisms and fiber optic cable. Basically, everything a Russian soldier would hope to get from their own Q stores. Reporters noted that a search for military supplies on Wildberries returned 78,000 items, with Zelensky claiming that their warehouses were supplying the Russian army with drone components and military equipment. However, currently there's no public information that Wildberries has a formal contract with the Russian military. Analysts who track the conflict point out that Russian soldiers often have to buy their own equipment, and this is why it's on the website. Basically saying that it's a supply channel, but not the main or official one. The second reason is money. Ukraine's whole deep strike doctrine, deep strike meaning hitting targets far beyond the front lines, runs on one slogan: less money means less war. Wildberries pays up to 13 billion rubles a year in profit tax alone, and pumps hundreds of millions more into the state through sales tax. Hurt the company and you hurt the government's tax base. The third reason is payback. Ukrainian officials tie these strikes directly to Russia hammering Ukraine's own delivery network, the postal company Nova Pochta. Russia had damaged or destroyed more than 400 post offices around the country by the start of this year. So, part of this is simple retaliation. It also brings the war back home for regular Russians, especially those in Moscow and St. Petersburg. We're already seeing videos of sellers complaining online about lost stock, and the fires were visible for miles around. So clearly there is plenty of reasons for why Ukraine chose these targets. But what have they actually done? It all kicked off around July 18th, with strikes on two of the company's biggest centres. These were some of the deadliest Ukrainian strikes in just over 2 years. Then it just kept going, pretty much daily. And on July 24th, a wave near St. Petersburg and one in Crimea reportedly used long-range FP-1 drones from the Ukrainian maker called Firepoint, These come under the command of the Ukrainian drone chief, a guy who goes by the call sign Magyar. And the effects are real. Russian officials report at least 9 people have been killed across the campaign and more than 100 injured. Russian business newspaper Kommersant says that the strikes have hit warehouses covering 552,000 square meters, roughly 10% of Wildberries' total logistic capacity, with about 8% of it now being unusable. Damage estimates are all over the place, ranging from $1.3 billion on the low end to about $2 billion on the high end. But of course, the real numbers will take time to come out, if they're ever made public at all. But the damage that might matter the most isn't the buildings, it's the sellers themselves. And here's the gut punch. Just weeks before the strikes, around July the 7th, Wildberries quietly changed its seller agreement to strip out its liability for goods destroyed by force majeure, explicitly including wartime and drone attacks. Force majeure just means an act of God, an event that nobody is legally on the hook for. So, when the warehouses burned, hundreds of thousands of small merchants ate the losses themselves, not the company. Russian social media filled up with videos of ruined entrepreneurs. The Kyiv Post reported that one young seller who borrowed around $150,000 just to buy stock watched it burn and then took his own life. That's the human cost sitting underneath the headline numbers. Now, here's where things get bigger than just one company. What Ukraine has rarely done is open a new front. For most of this war, their long-range drones went after oil refineries and energy, the stuff that funds the war directly. Now they've pointed those same weapons at consumer logistics, at the shelves that ordinary Russians actually shop from, and rebranded it as long-range sanctions. That's the shift right there. Economic warfare you can watch on the evening news. And Ukraine's drone commander put it pretty bluntly. He said that it's about destroying the illusion of comfortable peacetime existence for ordinary Russians. That's not really about logistics, that's about the mood inside the country. So what does this all actually mean for Russia's economy and its war in Ukraine? Firstly, there's the military effect, and this is pretty modest to be honest. Even independent Russian analysts say marketplace sales of gear here are real, but it's not the army's main supply line. So, this inconveniences soldiers and volunteer groups looking to buy their own kit, but it doesn't stave off the front in any meaningful way. So anyone telling you that this is a war-winning blow is overselling it a bit. Next, we have the economy and the public mood, and this is where I think the real weapon is. I don't think this was ever about body armor or drone accessories. I think it's about inflation and attention. Economists have already warned that if the state bails out Wildberries with cheap loans, that just feeds into Russia's existing inflation problem. And this platform was used by something like 85 to 90% of economically active Russians. So, for the first time, for a lot of people, the war just showed up in one place they thought they were safe, their own shopping app. One Russian professor put it perfectly. He said that there were already a lot of nails and they just keep hammering them in. Fuel shortages from refinery strikes, and now this. That's the strategy. Death by 1,000 nails. Or cuts, as the saying goes. Lastly is the Kremlin angle. Putin personally blessed the 2024 merger, and because Rus-linked structures reportedly pull in around $600 million in dividends last year, hitting Wildberries may also mean hitting the oligarchs close to Putin's inner circle. But there's also a risk here for Ukraine, because civilians have died in these strikes. Under international humanitarian law, which is basically the rulebook for what counts as a legal target in war, selling dual-use goods alone may not be enough to make the warehouses a lawful target. That is genuinely contested though, and Ukraine owns that risk every single time a worker gets killed. But on the balance, I think they'll be alright. So what do you actually watch from here? Firstly, do these strikes continue past late June, or was it a one-off cluster? If the strikes keep coming, it's becoming a doctrine, not just a message. Secondly, observe whether Russia begins withdrawing air defense systems from the front lines to protect shopping warehouses, as this would indicate that Ukraine is gaining the upper hand by stretching them thin. As I've said in the past, Russia's vast size was once an advantage and it's now becoming a weakness. And lastly, keep an eye on whether Western governments follow Ukraine's lead and sanction Wildberries itself, not the bank it's connected to, as this was already done by the EU and UK earlier in the conflict. So what do you think? Is bombing Russia's Amazon a smart new front in this war, or is this a line Ukraine shouldn't have crossed? Please leave your thoughts down below. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. See you!